more on this community work, kind of shared learning. I'm really happy to be here amongst community workers because I work myself, and this is a community work piece of research. It's not a up in the ivory towers piece of research. We really want to see this rolled out across communities. I'm just going to say I'm up in Monaghan thanks to the vaccine, but the internet has been great all week, and it's just, of course, as we started to be a bit rocky. So if that happens, I'll try my best to get back in, but if not, I will rearrange and all that. But I think we're going to be okay. So I will just share my screen now. Hopefully it will let me. Here we go. Can everybody see that okay? Thumbs up. Yeah. Perfect. So I'll just present.
Oh, I did so much.
No.
Yeah.
That's okay. Everyone can see?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, so about a little bit about Uplift, if people haven't heard of us before. So we're a campaigning community across the island of Ireland. We have Act Now in Northern Ireland and Uplift in the Republic. We take action on issues around social justice, equality, environmental sustainability. These are some of our bigger events that we've mobilized around refugees, the National Maternity Hospital campaign, which is one of our biggest campaigns. So we're multi-issue, we're responsive to our members, and ultimately we're a community work organisation in a slightly different model, in that we are very much focused on the organising and campaigning aspect of the issues that affect people's lives. And what we wanted to do with this research is develop a community work response to the far right. And to provide, because what we found is that the far right, sorry, that's just a little bit of housekeeping. What we found is that the far right have developed these playbooks internationally, that they are organising, that they are forming communities and sharing resources with each other around language that they know works, around narratives that they know work, around tactics that they know work. And we said, look, we're a community of almost 350,000 people in Ireland now. And we actually have the resources to develop a response that is based on evidence.
Hi, Suzanne. Oh. How are you? Hi.
We just maybe get people to mute while, yeah, grand. Yeah, so basically, and we decided on vaccine research for a very, very clear reason. We looked at the different issues that the far right were trying to find resonance with over the past year and a half or 2 years in Ireland. And there was things like sex education, gender and gender identity, migration, things like that. But we decided when COVID-19 hit, and we saw the amount of the rise in conspiracy theories around COVID-19 and in particular vaccines, we said that was the area that we wanted to focus in on. And while it maybe not seem that, short a road from having a doubt about a vaccine to, storming the US Capitol, it actually is quite a short road, and the metaphors are quite similar. So there's deep links between the anti-vax movement and the growth of far-right groups such as QAnon. Worryingly, anti-vaxxers, this is according to the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, anti-vaxxers are 500% more effective at recruitment via social media than pro-vaccine advocates. So clearly there's something wrong. We're saying the wrong thing. And also we are in a public health crisis. So we want people in Ireland to be equipped with the right language to persuade their friends and families and loved ones to take the vaccine and resist persuasion by these anti-vaxxers. And I was doing an interview with a journalist from the Irish Times, and he was like, how do you think people are falling down these rabbit holes? I was like, and they're being facilitated by Facebook and Instagram and social media giants to be these people who spread misinformation are being facilitated to target our loved ones. So our response as community workers was that we should be the ones speaking to our loved ones. We should be the ones talking to our communities, and let's put the right narratives in place for that. So yeah, and so we wanted to, and again, as we're a community work organisation, a bit like Rachel, what you were saying around giving the toolkit to local authorities, we want to give a toolkit to our members and to community work organisations as well. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the framing theory, or the theory behind how language works in our brains to kind of get this started. And I don't want to go too much into the details of it, but I think it's important for us to understand this as communicators and community workers. So I did a fellowship a couple of years ago on kind of message framing, and it's based in cognitive linguistics, which is just a fancy way of saying how our brain works and responds to language. And I was like, I can't believe I started out doing community work and here I am looking at, cognitive linguistics, but actually it's all very similar. And what I find is that community workers tend to have the best grasp of this stuff because we understand how people relate to each other and how people talk to each other. Very values based. So that's the link, I think, is that this is really relevant to our work. So we were talking about persuading the vaccine hesitant. And when one of the most fundamental things for us to understand when we're talking about people who we feel are persuadable. I remember when I started out kind of as a young, angry activist, I thought there were people who are left wing and there are people who are right wing, and I just needed to shout at the people who are right wing, and then that would be it. But actually, what the evidence shows when you do language research and you do linguistic research with people and focus groups and things like that, is that in most samples of people, about 60 to 70% are in that persuadable bucket. And persuadable doesn't mean that they're in the middle between two opposing views. It doesn't mean that they're centrist. It doesn't mean that they have centrist views. It means that they're actually all over the place. It actually means that they can equally believe that migrants are coming to take our jobs and that people should be treated fairly in our system and people should be documented. They can believe both of those things at the same time. And it's the person who speaks to them, or it's the narrative that speaks to them, which brings out the right frames and the frames that make them feel good, that wins the argument, essentially. And for when I discovered this, I was like, my mind blown, because in community work, it's always about, you have to meet people where they are. But actually, there kind of is no place where people are. People are actually all over the place, most of us. Like, so we have, we're probably in the 2 to 5% of extremely motivated people who care deeply about change in the world and who are activists and who decided to dedicate our lives to community work or civil society. But we're a minority. Then we have a base of people who are about 5 to 10% of the population. And then we have that bit in the middle that's about 60 to 70%. And then the very, very far right are the same. They have about 2 to 5% of the population are very active. They're the Gemma O'Dohertys and whoever else is. And then they have their base, which is about 5 to 10% of the population. And we're both in conflict for this 60 to 70%. Actually, conflict's not a good frame because they're the bad guys. So that 60 to 70% in the middle is actually to play for. And that blew my mind. I just thought, like, people are where they are. So this is actually a much more accurate view of where human beings are. Not left, right, not on a linear scale. We're actually all much more this messy mix of values. And what's really interesting about values is that they have what's known as a seesaw effect. So they've tested this. At one set of values or speak to one set of values or remind people that they have one set of values, the less they will have the opposing values. So if we talk to people about a world at peace, a beautiful tomorrow, unity with nature, all of those kind of things that pull people into benevolence and into the idea that they're a good person and that this is stuff they care about, things like achievement, success, and ambition actually go down. So the more that we pull people into our frameworks, the less likely they are to be able to be manipulated the next time they're exposed to far right messaging and framing. And that also blew my mind, is that we actually have control over how vulnerable people are to these kind of malicious frames. And so the reason why the far right, and not just the far right, I mean, what we call them, the near right or conservatives or neoconservatives or whatever, people who really just don't like progress, they are very clever in understanding how this stuff works. And it's why, to a certain extent, we have been on the back foot as progressives for the last 20, well, maybe forever, who knows. They have basically invested massive amounts of research into narrative, into controlling how people think about things. And they understand this concept, which is the idea of the fast brain and the slow brain. And quite often, community workers aren't as bad at this now as lawyers or other kind of advocates. Is what we tend to do, though, is talk to the slow brain. So the fast brain is the part of us that developed first when we were coming out of the trees or whatever, when we were evolving. And it basically makes decisions really quickly, like 15 to 20 seconds maximum. And it sees the world in very simple terms, and it's really connected to what's known as our limbic system. So our whole body feels a thing. So it's why advertisers, there's the old tropes about sex sells, or they're always trying to, perfume ads are trying to show you this beautiful world that you'll be in if you spray yourself with this particular perfume. It's because that part of your brain isn't particularly logical, it isn't particularly rational, but it's very powerful. It's a very powerful, and we're in our fast brain most of the time, even though we would like to think that we're not. We actually are. We're not particularly logical creatures. Then the slow brain is the part that developed later, which is the part that can do maths equations, that can understand abstract theories, that can engineer bridges, all of that sort of stuff. And that's our frontal kind of cortex. It developed later. And what they've actually done research where they've shown that using that part of your brain burns more calories than using the harder work to process. And what we tend to do, or we progressives often do, is talk directly to the slow part of the brain. So 86% of people who come here do so, and we reference statistics, we reference legal documents, we reference international law, all of these things that, to be honest with you, Mary from Longford, who's got 2 kids screaming and has a pile of washing to do and needs to do things, she's not going to, if that's coming through in her radio waves, she's not going to hear that, but she will hear the likes of Nigel Farage or Gemma O'Doherty, who's speaking directly to her fast brain. And so it's not that she is inherently anything or has inherent beliefs about these things, or particularly well formed or kind of stubborn beliefs about things. It's that somebody is talking to the part of her brain that she actually is most connected to, and we're not. So this is an example of what I want to talk to you about, which is negation. So if I'm to say to everybody, don't think of an elephant. Hands up, how many people thought about an elephant? Yeah. So basically, this is to do with the idea of negation, which is to say, and this will be really relevant later when we talk about what frames to avoid when talking about vaccines. When I say to you elephant, whether I say elephant or not elephant, you're still in that frame. That word has the power to trigger the frame of elephant in your mind. And so the way that our brains developed as well is that we actually have physical structures in our brains that store information about particular scenarios and particular frameworks. And so if I was to say to you now, I'm going to do a little experiment, everybody in the chat, I'm going to say dollhouse, the word dollhouse. And so I did this with my mother earlier over breakfast. So what comes to mind when I say dollhouse to you? I'm going to just stop and have a look at the chat and see what words are coming in. Child, absolutely child, childhood. Pink, child, children, play, plastic, girls, toys, tiny furniture, gendered, yeah, gendered, doll, wooden box, imagination, yeah. So all stuff coming through about children and childhood and imagination and playing. And yeah, actually also like gendered, but that's maybe another conversation for another day. And so what you won't think about when I say dollhouse is a nuclear reactor. And that might seem kind of obvious to you, but frames are simulations or mental models of the real world. So it's what a particular situation is, and how we expect things to work. So for example, we might expect to find certain things in a dollhouse, miniature stoves, cats, people, etc. If we found a nuclear reactor, we'd be surprised because it doesn't fit in the model. So it's really difficult when somebody is triggered by a word to get them to think of something well outside of that frame. And that's going to be important later as well. So here's an example of, and my poor colleague, Shay, who's just gone back to Australia, she worked on this campaign. I'm like, look, there's no shame. We've all done it, right? So can anyone want to say in the chat here what frame maybe comes up here for them when they see this image? Chat again. Yeah, illegal crime. Yeah, criminality. Yeah, asylum and crime linked together. Yeah, exactly. And so this was a campaign. This was actually a really interesting example. How would I rate Canva's presentation experience? Well, they interrupted me in the middle of a presentation, so not great. This is an example of a campaign in Australia where they don't have much of a community work framework as much as we do. And so a lot of the advocacy work is legal advocacy. And this was a very legalistic frame that they used. And when the person who I did my fellowship, she went over to research this language and the language that they used. And she found that the NGO sector had helped create the biggest opposition to progressive migration policies that she had ever seen. It was 20%. It's usually about 10% through language like this. So it's really important. It's really, really important for us to not strengthen their frames, because they're using the right frames for what they want to do. And quite often what we end up doing is showing up and repeating it. We just say, no, you're wrong. Or the worst things are things like mythbusters and fact checkers, because you're literally just repeating what they say. And then there's other things as well, like, actually Ireland doesn't take that many refugees, things like that. I'm like, well, hold on a second. That statement actually reinforces the original proposition, which is that refugees are bad. And actually the framework that we should be using to talk about those things is that people move. People move. It's normal. It's the most normal thing in the world. That's how humans got around the world. What we're doing is making it unsafe for people when they move. What we're doing is throwing up roadblocks to people when they move. But people move. People migrate. We mix. Thing. It's brilliant. More refugees, brilliant, but it's almost like sometimes we show up and apologize for our position when actually we need to be much clearer about what our position is and pull people towards us. And so this is a really good example as well of I think it was Denmark, I can't remember the country, I must learn it, said that you couldn't advertise something as milk if it wasn't dairy, if it didn't come from an animal. And so this oat milk company just called it not milk, and the sales stayed the same. Everybody saw not milk and thought milk, and so it didn't actually matter. So that's the power of negation, which is going to be relevant in a minute. Then, so this is another really good example of the frame of taxation. So, I mean, this is another, like, there's a picture of me dressed as Snow White with a big sign saying, take the tax, my first week in Uplift, which was actually like the worst, worst framing looking back on it, because of the way that conservatives tend to talk about tax as like a lighter, as like lower tax is lighter burden, bigger tax is heavier burden. And this frame sets the tone for discussions about taxes. So we show up within that frame that a tax is a burden on the rich, which, like, I mean, yeah, but the actual, what we actually should be doing is talking about what tax is, what tax does. So we should be talking, instead of talking about taxing the wealthy and punishing the wealthy and all of that kind of stuff, we should be talking how we can build libraries, we can have mental health services in our local communities, we can do all this and front load the frame of what it is that tax does. So I'm just going to show, I'm going to check the time there. Yeah, I have time. I'm going to show a little video now, if my internet cooperates, that lays this out really well of how this campaign group managed to shift this frame. anyone who's been to this presentation before has seen this 1,000 times now. So
there once was a library, a beautiful, busy, award-winning library. Unfortunately, times were hard. The city of Troy, Michigan no longer had enough money for its library, so it scheduled a vote asking the townspeople to approve a small tax increase. This angered an anti-tax group known as the Tea Party. Well organized and well funded, they started posting "Vote No" signs, mailing flyers, and making noise. They dominated the conversation, changing the topic from library, books, and reading to taxes, taxes, taxes. With no money and an election less than a month away, the library needed help. They needed something attention-getting, audacious, maybe even vile. So we decided to form signs around town that said, "Vote to close the library August 2nd, book burning party August 5th. The idea of book burning is bad enough, but gleefully making it a party, well, that angered people enough to send them to our Facebook page.
You people are sick. This is disgusting. Reject the wackos. Vote yes.
But we didn't stop there. We created videos.
Imagine this times 200,000. How cool is that?
Posted on Twitter.
The Troy Library might be short on money, but it has books to burn.
Created items for sale.
A book bag. How ironic.
We placed newspaper ads, created check-ins, posted flyers, and lined up entertainment.
You guys are booking a band?
People became enraged.
Why would you burn books, idiots?
This is horrible.
Cheap imbeciles.
What the is this world coming
We
to?
should burn your signs instead.
Complete and total
This is
idiots.
really
Shut
just pathetic.
Jerks.
They posted their own links, shared with friends, debated the merits of libraries and the audacity of burning books. The conversation spread from Facebook to city council meetings, from newspapers to TV. It grew from local to national, even international news. Once it reached a fevered pitch, we revealed the true intent of our campaign. A vote against the library is like a vote to burn books. And people started posting, tweeting, and reporting all over again. In the end, we had changed the conversation completely, from taxes, 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 to library, library, library. And on August 2nd, the yes voters, voters who don't normally turn out to vote, turned out at levels 342% greater than projected. And the library won by a landslide. The town's library, its beautiful, award-winning library, had been saved. Not every story at the library has a happy ending. Fortunately, this one did.
I always laugh. He says, "Not every story at the library has a happy ending." Like, what does it mean? But yeah, if you want to throw in the chat there what you thought about that, but it really clearly illustrates that if you do not like if you don't like the conversation, change it. If you don't like what's being said, change the conversation. And what I always is like, okay, so there's tax, library, library, library. And so we often talk about this, oh, sorry, bring it up now, in Uplift as this, we ask ourselves all the time, what is the cupcake? So, and basically that means, so Nat always says, don't take your policy out in public, it's unseemly. Which is basically, instead of talking to the slow brain and talking about the submission or whatever like that on the radio, which is describing the recipe. We don't really have Betty Crocker here, but that's kind of her example. Describe the cupcake, describe the beautiful tomorrow that we're working towards, describe the world where undocumented people have papers, where they're able to put roots down in their communities and form, with what they're already doing, be part of the beautiful tapestry of Irish life, all of that kind of stuff. Don't pull people always towards the tax. Talk about the library, if that's the kind of the best way that I can describe that. So then that's framing. That's like a whistle stop tour of framing. What I want to talk about next is about our research methodology. So this was based on kind of what I learned in that fellowship around how to actually look at how language is used and manipulated, and to pull out the frames that are being used. So what I did to start with was frame coding. So we looked at, and actually community work student from Maynooth, Nathan Feeney, helped me out loads with this. So what we did was we looked at how anti-vaxxers were talking about vaccines, how vaccine advocates like the World Health Organization and the HSE and different groups like that were talking about vaccines, and how the media, how these frames were then showing up in the media. And what we did was a thing called frame coding. So we had a kind of a small enough number of frames available to us to kind of like saying, okay, how are we talking? Are they talking about disease? Are they talking about, you know, conspiracy theories, things like that? So what frame is being used as in the way that people talk about vaccines? And what we found was, so this is the anti-vax frames. So this was from, I think it was about 150 or 160 language samples that we took from around end of January, early February, from a variety of different sources. So we looked at comment sections on the Journal and the Irish Times around all articles about vaccines. We looked at publications from big kind of some of the bigger anti-vax conspiracy theorists, things like that. And what we found that overwhelmingly when people are talking about, when anti-vaxxers are talking about vaccines, they're talking about disease and ill health. So it's, you know, so I give you some examples of the kind of tokens that we collect. So, you know, the vaccine court has awarded over $1 billion in compensation to vaccine injured children. Healthy people don't need to be vaccinated was a big one. And then just kind of describing the diseases, the vaccine injuries and vaccine induced diseases like sleep disorder, narcolepsy, cataplexy, and associated muscle weakness and things like that. So they very, very much so the dominant frame in terms of how anti-vaxxers were talking about vaccines was prepare yourselves. Because the dominant frame for how pro-vaccine advocates were talking about vaccines was also disease. So a little bit lower, 13%, 13% of the tokens that we collected about how people like the World Health Organization, the HSE, different groups. We also looked at pro-vaccine comments, and so a lot of it was, and like a little bit like we spoke earlier when I said don't think of an elephant, a lot of it was like, you know, polio was an absolutely awful, awful disease. People suffered so much from polio, so get the vaccine. And what I was interested in was, I was like, well, I remember having really interesting conversations at the time around that, when actually the idea of eradication of these types of illnesses is a good message to give to people. And so we decided to test it. And we'll talk about what came out there as well, but basically that the frame of disease, of naming diseases at the very start, naming all of the diseases and saying, you know, the vaccine will prevent this disease, will stop this disease. We're still pulling people into the framework of disease rather than health. You can see that disease is about 13% and immunity is only about 2.1%. So we're talking about disease far more than we're talking about immunity. Another frame that popped out as well was we coded it every time we saw somebody ridiculing anti-vaxxers. And while it can be tempting, and especially when you're frustrated, to kind of get snarky or to ridicule people, that really concerned me, because if anti-vax messaging is 500% more effective at recruiting people, and we're showing up with the same frame and ridiculing people, we're absolutely going to lose them. We're absolutely going to lose them to the other side. And then, yeah, so even there, like health was 1.4%, like health 1.4% and disease 13%. So I just thought that was very, very interesting. And then, so these are some of the examples of the ways that advocates talked about it. So so positive primary analysis confirms the ability of our vaccine to prevent COVID-19 disease and prevent severe COVID-19 disease. This one just named loads of diseases: measles, rubella, whooping cough, smallpox, mumps, polio, hepatitis A, and now COVID-19. Thank you to scientists for keeping us safe all these years. So front loaded with disease, and then, but also, you know, we got rid of it. And then the science behind the vaccine is fascinating. So this is like, it's factual, but it also is about disease. So it's a modified virus, and the genetic material is removed, so it can't trigger infection in humans, but can't is a negation as well. So it brings up the frame of disease and infection. Some of us are in that group of people, 5 to 15% of people who read things really rationally, who sit down and, you know, really digest all the information, who are very motivated to take a vaccine, very motivated. However, most people are in that fast brain space, and when they hear disease again and again and again, they will in some way have a connection to it. And I think about the example of my mother, who got the vaccine, which is why I'm at home in Monaghan this week, thank God. Who, even though she was convinced to get the vaccine and wanted it, and because of certain messages and certain things that were happening in her life, she was still really worried. Like when she went, she was still really, really worried. She had the pamphlet out. She was like, what does that low platelet count mean? What is this? And so the idea that she was putting something into her body that could potentially cause her dis-ease was present. And I would say that that's present in a lot of people, even if they're going to get the vaccine, even if they're there. So that's why we talk about vaccine hesitancy and vaccine skepticism as kind of two interchangeable things. And so then this was the way it showed up in the media. So yeah, this was about 14.1% was about vaccine deaths. I think there's a word of caution about this. It was just as the vaccines were starting to be launched, and the media was really focusing in on these deaths, particularly of older people who probably never should have been given the vaccine in the first place, who were kind of on death's door, and the vaccine actually was shouldn't have been given to them. Disease again was there, 9.9% of the sample, quite a bit. Side effects was there, 7%. So again, who is winning out in terms of how the media speaks about vaccines? It's the anti-vax narrative of disease, and probably because advocates are using that narrative as well. So yeah, so that's kind of some of the examples around underlying diseases and increasing the chances of outbreak of diseases and things like that, around how things were spoken about. So just to kind of recap, okay, so anti-vaxxers say vaccines cause disease. We say vaccines cure disease. They say we can't trust science. We say trust science. They say big pharma are dodgy. We say big pharma aren't dodgy, which we should not be saying, by the way. We shouldn't be trying to convince people that they can trust pharmaceutical companies. We should be telling them the vaccine is going to keep them healthy, but not that. Vaccines pose a risk to your children. Benefits of vaccines outweigh the risks to your children. They're going to make vaccines mandatory. We won't make vaccines mandatory. So we keep showing up. Like, we just keep showing. They keep inviting us, and we keep on showing up. So whose pitch are we playing on? We're playing on their pitch. We're in this frame of disease and tyranny and all of these kind of things when we're talking about vaccines. But we're not talking about our framework, which is, you know, I got to see my mother this week. I got to give her a big hug. Like our communities are going to be connected again. Like, we're going to actually get out of this pandemic. So we thought that the messages that we wanted to test should be much more in this area of the pitch than in the opposition's pitch. And we connected, we basically did 4. So the first one was kind of status, the science and safety, but it was actually more eradication. We tested care in communities, which was, we all have a responsibility to each other. Spoiler alert, but that one tanked, and I'll tell you why later. Then we did hugs and connection, and we did hope and freedom. And there was 2 winning messages out of that. But the methodology that we used was called dial testing. So it's not actually used much here in Ireland. I'm actually at the moment trying to develop a piece of software so that we can do it much cheaper here, so it can be more community work based, because this research cost us close to €20,000, because we had to use a US company. But what's so great about dial testing is that you get really, really rich data of people hear a message and they dial up and down as they hear it. So you get exact points in the message that do well, and exact points in the message where people drop off. And so it gives you really, really rich information. And then you can also ask them questions before they hear the message, and then ask them the same questions after they hear the message. And so we did that. We asked people how likely they would be to take the vaccine. So actually, first of all, we used a survey panel aggregator, like an independent aggregator to bring together a representative sample of the Irish population, which is 1,000 participants. We had 1,002 participants in this, and people were surveyed and listened to our messages throughout the last 2 weeks of February in 2021. And this is how it broke down, which is worrying, especially if they're 500% more effective at recruitment than us. So we asked people, we broke people into segments via these 2 questions. The first one was how long, or sorry, will you get the vaccine? How likely are you to get the vaccine when it becomes available to you? And a 1 to 10 scale. And then when the vaccine becomes available to you, how long will you wait to get it, which was a no time to never scale. And we broke people into these 3 groups based on that. What we found was that the very, very pro-vaccine base was 26.4%, which is great. I just saw another survey today that apparently people in Ireland are some of the most motivated to get vaccinated, which is great. We had the persuadable. So remember I said earlier, usually it's about 60%. So it's 57.9%. We're in that persuadable, somewhat hesitant bucket. And then about 15.7% were very vaccine skeptical. So this is less than 4 on that scale of will you get the vaccine? And that's what worried recruiting, and they're more effective at us than recruiting, then it doesn't really matter that we have a bigger base. And what we need to do is get our base having the right messages and the right approach to speaking to people in their lives about the vaccine. See. So I'm just going to stop there around the methodology and see if there's any questions actually. Time we're at. Anything there? Does that make sense? I just want to keep, I know that's a lot of information, so I just want to make sure. Great. And I will click. Oh, there's Eileen, you speaking. Can't hear you. Can't hear you, Eileen.
You're not on mute, Eileen, but we still can't hear you.
Maybe type it in, yeah, type it in, Rachel, yeah. Right, I'll share my screen again there now. And so how did we measure the best messages? So again, we are community work researchers. So we were like, if this message doesn't spread, it's no good. You know, if our messages aren't spreadable, they're not any good. So we asked, we looked at 2 criteria for assessing the very best messages, which was one was persuasion of the vaccine hesitant group, so the most hesitant people after hearing the messages. So we asked them before, how likely are you to get the vaccine? And then we asked them directly after they heard the messages, how likely are you to get the vaccine? And it was randomized. So people heard all 4 messages, but in random order. So the data is trustworthy there. Then even more importantly, or maybe not more importantly, but as important, we had the likelihood of vaccine advocates to share the message. So we asked our base, that 26.4% of people, how likely are you to share this message with your family and your friends? And this is because this isn't to do with spreadable. So we don't have Miracle Whip really here, do we? I don't think we do. But in the US, basically, Miracle Whip is like this kind of like, it's like almost like mayonnaise or salad cream or something like that. And their marketing team, who are very smart, spend 98% of their marketing budget on what they call super heavy users. I don't know how I'd feel if I was a super heavy user of Miracle Whip. And so why would they do that? Why would they spend their marketing budget on people who are already using loads of their product? It's because those people spread their message. It's because those people become their marketers for them. So they're the likes of the people who show up to the family meal with a, but I made this with Miracle Whip because apparently you can use it in chocolate cake anyway. Or, you know, I made this salad, you wouldn't believe I put Miracle Whip in it. And actually they, through all of their money and all of their research, have figured out that that's the best way to get a message to spread, is to get the people who care about it the most to give them messages that they want to spread, basically. And that we know work. So it's those 2 criteria, and we know that they work and people will spread them. So 2 of the messages were winners. I'll tell you the care and communities one now. It was very interesting. I thought that one would do the best. So it kind of went a little bit like, in Ireland, we care about each other. You know, we all need to get vaccinated to keep our community safe and all that kind of stuff. And it absolutely tanked. And I think that it tanked because, in fairness, for the last year and a half, all we've been told about is our responsibilities. And we haven't been told about how we're going to get the cupcake at the end, what the good stuff that's coming our way might be. And I think that just at that particular time as well, in late February, everybody was just done, finished. So actually responsibility is not the best frame to bring people into. So what is? So this is the message here, and I'll play it twice.
Most of us can't wait to give the loved ones we've been isolated from a big hug when the COVID-19 pandemic is over. If enough of us take the vaccine this year, there is real hope on the horizon. The COVID vaccine offers us the chance to get back to a life of connection, family, and community once more. It means we'll be able to hug our loved ones, that children and their grandparents will be able to spend time together again, safe in the knowledge that we are all protected and vaccinated.
I'll play that one more time. So the orange line is the very skeptical. That's that 15.6% of people. The blue line is our base, that 26.5% of people who are super on side. And that green line is the persuadable, or the kind of the slightly hesitant group. And as you can see, if you want to watch out for it, as soon as we mention the word vaccine, the skeptical drop off. But they come up again a few times, and that's what's important. They come up again when we mention grandparents and grandchildren, and they come up again when we mention getting out of the pandemic. So there's some key points there. So I'll just play it again. I think it's when we mention the come up. If I'm wrong, correct me in the comment.
Most of us can't wait to give the loved ones we've been isolated from a big hug when the COVID-19 pandemic is over. If enough of us take the vaccine this year, there is real hope on the horizon. The COVID vaccine offers us the chance to get back to a life of connection, family, and community once more. It means we'll be able to hug our loved ones, that children and their grandparents will be able to spend time together again, safe in the knowledge that we are all protected and vaccinated.
Yeah, so that was the little spike at the end there. It was it's a little bit off, but it was when we talked about we'll be able to connect again, grandparents and grandchildren, safe in the knowledge that we're all protected. They came up a little bit there. So yeah, it's a really interesting methodology when you see the literal moment to moment ways that people are dialing and how people dial up and down.
Can I just ask Emily, are we saying that really the ones that we should be focusing on are the green brigade, the green line persuadables, and what?
So yeah, that's a really good question. So we're focusing on both, but in different ways, right? So the very hesitant, we are looking for messages that will persuade them, and the very the already very on side pro-vaccine people, we should be looking for messages that they will spread. That persuadable group in the middle, what we said was that actually we're not that we're not tracking them as much, but we're more interested in the two people who are speaking to them. So if we have messages that we know will persuade the skeptical and that we know the base will repeat, we're going to get to that 60% in the middle. Makes sense. So like speaking of that, actually, I think the next slide will show you some of the data on that. Yeah. So this is quite incredible, actually. So this is, we asked the vaccine skeptical participants, how likely are you to get the vaccine when it becomes available to you? And the average score of that group of people, at 15% about, before they heard this message, was 1.48. It was how likely they were. And then after they heard the message, they were almost twice as likely to get the vaccine. So we can measure from that this is a persuasive message, because the most skeptical were twice as likely to say that they would be willing to get the vaccine after they heard it. And then the next criteria, which is really important, is that we asked our base just how likely they were to spread this message. And it was one of the top two. So 6.9%, or 6.9 out of 10. another message performed quite well in that area, which was this Roaring Twenties message that I was like, we're all going to get back to partying again. It's going to be wild. And while our base said that they would spread that message, it didn't actually persuade the very hesitant, potentially because they've been partying the whole time. Who knows? So that's why both was important. And while we're trying to persuade that middle, and you might think, okay, we want to watch the green line. We want to watch those hesitant people, see how they're being persuaded. So that was that one. That was hugs. And I'm going to have later a whole do say, don't say guide. So don't worry too much about picking up on the particular messages just yet. So the next winner, oh, sorry, this was some of the stuff that people liked about this message. So I see the silver lining with the vaccines being invented. I cannot wait for lives to go back to normal. So that was the persuadable group, person in the middle, or not in the middle, and the person who was all over the place. The vaccine hesitant participants said, I like how they're trying to cheer people up by saying they will get to see their loved ones and friends if people get vaccinated. So there was pulling people into this, like, you know, friends and family and a bit of cheer again. And then the advocate said that they like the mention of grandparents and grandchildren, as this is an area that has been so impacted by the pandemic. And I think that in particular, that idea of intergenerational connection in particular is really, really important, because it breaks through the hesitancy a little bit. Like, I know, again, my own mother, to her, you know, the AstraZeneca, people were rightly really freaked out about the AstraZeneca stuff because the media was just talking about clots nonstop. And she said, you know what, though, I don't care because I want to see you. And, you know, Mary got it, my sister, and Jared got it, my brother, and they're fine, and I'm just getting it. Because I want to hug you again. I want to see you. It's been 6, I haven't seen you since Christmas, all that sort of stuff. So that's the stuff that's going to persuade people. What is not going to persuade people is, well, actually, did you know that you're more likely to get killed in crossing the road than you are to get a blood clot? You're more likely to get that's actually not going to help. What's going to actually persuade people is, I want to hug you again. I want to see you again. So this is the next message. Sorry. And this is the eradication. Jesus, aren't humans amazing message, basically.
Vaccines are one of the best inventions in the history of humankind. Through science, we have collectively eradicated dangerous diseases like polio, measles, and rubella. The COVID-19 vaccine has been safely developed by scientists, and while some people may experience side effects, this is to be expected and normal. But still, some people refuse to do their research or understand that vaccines are safe, with others pushing conspiracies and misinformation. We can trust science and scientists. The truth is, most people will feel fine after their vaccine and be at a much lower risk of contracting a serious case of COVID-19.
I'll just play that one more time as well. So if you can see, they drop off. They always drop off the hesitant when you even say the word vaccine, which is to be expected. But what they come back up again is when we talk about the eradication of diseases. And what I kind of checked this out with an app because I was like, I didn't expect people to like the stuff about polio and that to actually work. And she was like, and negation, eradication is its own frame in itself. So when we pull people towards the frame of eradication first, it's safe enough to mention the polio and the measles after that, because they've already been pulled into the idea of eradicating these terrible diseases. So I'll just play that one more time. And also science as well. I was really, really surprised when I said we can trust science and scientists. I expected that to absolutely tank, but it actually didn't. So I'll just play that again.
Vaccines are one of the best inventions in the history of humankind. Through science, we have collectively eradicated dangerous diseases like polio, measles, and rubella. The COVID-19 vaccine has been safely developed by scientists, and while some people may experience side effects, this is to be expected and normal. But still, some people refuse to do their research or understand that vaccines are safe, with others pushing conspiracies and misinformation. We can trust science and scientists. The truth is, most people will feel fine after their vaccine and be at a much lower risk of contracting a serious case of COVID-19.
So, feel free to just keep adding stuff into the chat as well. I'll stop, or if you want to interrupt me, Rachel, at any point, just do if there's anything interesting. Oh. It's not playing, is it not?
You're cutting out every so often, Emily, and we miss a few nuggets.
Okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to play it one more time then.
Vaccines are one of the best inventions in the history of humankind. Through science, we have collectively eradicated dangerous diseases like polio, measles, and rubella. The COVID-19 vaccine has been safely developed by scientists, and while some people may experience side effects, this is to be expected and normal. But still, some people refuse to do their research or understand that vaccines are safe, with others pushing conspiracies and misinformation. We can trust science and scientists. The truth is, most people will feel fine after their vaccine and be at a much lower risk of contracting a serious case of COVID-19.
Great. Some people say I actually can't turn my camera off. Can I turn my camera off and still show you the slides? Can you see the slides? Oh, perfect. Great. So that's the eradication message, and so that's why I really was surprised this message performed well, because I was like, is this not the status quo talking about disease, all that sort of stuff? And when I checked it out with the woman who mentored me, she was like, no, eradication is its own framework. The idea of eradicating this, getting past this, getting back to, well, we don't want to get back to normality because it wasn't working. So this one performed the best in terms of persuading the very, very skeptical. It went from 1.48 to 2.8. So it doubled, fully doubled. So we asked, that was them before they heard the message, they were 1.48, and after they heard this particular message, they were 2.8, which is really, really good bump. And this was very popular with our base. 7.6. So as you can see, it was well up there in terms of the base saying that they would share this with their friends and family. So this was a really, really effective message. This was our most effective message. So I might stop there. Any other questions there? I know this stuff is quite dense. I can't really see the chat, so if you want to shout out, Rachel.
Yeah, sure. I think lots of people finding it. Well, there was just a couple of comments just in terms of the Wi-Fi. They're breaking up for a few seconds every now and again, Emily. But I think it is better that you have the camera turned off. So Jolene was saying it's really interesting to see the graph and the response literally as the various words are said, seeing that effect instantly. It's really making me think about how I frame messages. So I think that was kind of an important one. And just generally, I think people just saying just that it's interesting, that it's very interesting just to see, how this is happening and how you can track the effect of the messaging. I just did have a question myself as well, which was around, did you do any thinking or talking about the importance of who's given the message, not just in terms of their own position with regard to vaccines, but like whether it's children or older people, or who the people are. I saw a YouTube clip of kids singing a song about taking the vaccine to the tune of Alleluia, so kind of just that kind of thing around the cohorts of people.
Who says it? Yeah. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but it's messenger is just as important as message. Now, unfortunately, because this research methodology is so expensive, until I get my fiance to build it for me, we weren't actually able to afford to do it by messenger. But that is actually so important around who says it. And so what we did instead was we looked at some of the trust indexes and kind of market research in those areas around who is best to say that. So I'll come to that now in a minute. So then this is what people liked about this research, and this is the really key. This is that the vaccine hesitant participant said that they really liked that it backed up vaccines with examples of how they have worked before. That actually is a very powerful message. But again, word of caution, don't lead with the diseases, lead with the concept of eradication and protection. It put emphasis on how vaccines are safe and are widely tested before hitting the public. and the reassurance that the vaccine is safe and it's okay to have a little bit of a side effect from it. I will get into this. So yeah, this is a quick caution on this message. These were some things that came through. So yeah, so one thing was I found the tone a bit smug and condescending. I'm pro-vaccine and will take it, but having concerns about it does not mean that one has not done their research. So that was that's why I tested that, to see how that landed with people. Or is a conspiracy theorist. Many people have genuine concerns, and a minority will be unable to take the vaccine for health reasons. Also, vaccines have not 100% eradicated measles. So that was an interesting one there. The second caution was this, that the main thing was that you can trust scientists. Presumably, the person who composed this hasn't heard of thalidomide or the nerve gas experiments on airman at Porton Down. And I think that is also a very, very good point, that we can't, like I was saying a little bit earlier about trusting that people are, this is safe. We have to respect that some communities, particularly Indigenous communities, have not had that experience of science and doctors. And I think that's just a really important point there. Now, so this is what you were talking about there, Rachel. Can I just check, can I still be heard, or is my internet going? Yeah, good. So while having a well-tested narrative is essential, the right messengers are just as essential. And so this is by Kantar Media, which is a massive, massive market research company. And what they have found, that trust in brand and service information sources, so what people trust most is friends and family, review sites, then the news, and you can see there's quite a jump between friends and family and review sites and news and information websites. Like it's almost like it's 15-20% that they're 93% likely to trust their friends and family, and then the next one down, 76% news and information. They say that social media platforms 51%. So that to me offers a nugget of hope, right? That if we are talking directly, ringing up, texting, actually speaking to the people in our lives, using the right messages, we have a better shot at convincing them than something they've seen online. And that offers me hope. Or a way out of this is that we have to absolutely talk to people in a way that they'll listen. So these are, I'm going to do the do's and don'ts really quickly, and then we're going to do breakout rooms. And kind of you'll have a chance to discuss this amongst yourselves and come back and we'll do the Q&A then. So the do's are to talk about hugs and connection, especially intergenerational connection. So the idea of seeing and embracing your loved one again. When we
Teams Martin 65. I give him a ring. I'll turn it and put it there.
Oh, I just mute. Yeah, good. Then also talk about eradication, but avoid pulling people towards the frame of disease. So the idea that we've collectively beaten pandemics and epidemics before through safe vaccines developed by hardworking scientists is a popular one, and will persuade people to take this vaccine. But focusing too much on the specific diseases and the horrors they inflicted will only pull people further into the frame of disease, the frame that anti-vaxxers use to recruit people. So it's better to talk about public health and eradication than it is to focus on the actual diseases. The next thing is to use social proofing, or the Mary Dend Road phenomenon, which is that human beings are much, much more likely to do something if they know that the people around them are also going to do the same thing, particularly in an Irish context. Apparently, we're some of the most conformist in Europe. So people are much more likely to take the vaccine if they hear other. So much more likely to listen to Mary from Three Houses Down than they are to listen to the World Health Organization, politicians, NGOs, and even social media influencers. Don't ridicule.
I'll ring him. So
we all need to climb off our high horse, basically. So remember that anti-vax recruiters are 500% more effective at recruiting than pro-vaccine advocates. They have laid complex traps that ensure our loved ones fall in or are dragged in. And part of their success hinges on how they make people feel validated, informed, and intelligent. And so if we show up armed with nothing but ridicule and boring facts, and then try to convince people who've been sucked in by conspiracy theories. Who are they going to listen to? Who are they going to move towards? They're going to move towards the people who make them feel good. Don't bring facts to a frame fight. So a very common phrase that we say is that facts bounce off of frames, and it's because of the way that our brain works. So if a loved one has been brought into the frame of disease by anti-vax influencers, meeting them there, armed with facts and figures, will only push them into that frame further and make them much more likely to disagree with you. You know, how many times have you heard from your loved ones, I've done my own research, you know, like I've watched a YouTube video about this. So even when we show our loved ones concrete proof that vaccines are safe and effective, they're just not going to go there with you. So when we're thinking fast, i.e. emotionally, we can't slow down and engage the more logical parts of our brain. People are much more likely to respond positively if we introduce a different frame instead, one that makes them feel good, like a hug or eradication, beating this thing. Then don't talk about responsibility. So yeah, it's where I've said this already, but it's worth knowing that our caring community's message performed the worst across all criteria. While this may seem disappointing and even concerning on the surface, given the context of the past year and a half, it makes sense. People have had to make huge sacrifices for the welfare of others for well over a year now. And so it makes sense that reminding people of the joy they can have again, rather than reminding them once more of their responsibilities, is much more likely to motivate them to take the vaccine. So I'm not going to go through this entire embrace and replace guide that I've done, but it's there for you, and I'll be sharing these slides. So a little bit like simple things, simple shifts in our language will really help. So saying vaccine protects us versus vaccine prevent disease. Vaccine keep us healthy, protect by the vaccine rather than vaccinated. Vaccines will help us see family and share our lives again. Vaccines will stop us from it. So that's all there, and I'll share all of this as a kind of a toolkit with you. But what I'd love now is for us to go in. Rachel, you're able to organize those rooms, are you? Yeah. So then I have 3 questions, and I'll put these in the chat for y'all, which is any reflections on what you just heard, just kind of high level reflections. Is there anything that isn't clear or that you need clarity on? Because I know it's all very dense. And then number 3 is, how do you actually, as community workers and people who are working with people all the time, how do you see this working on the ground with the communities that you work with? Because again, if you guys won't spread it, and if you don't think it's going to work, and if the people that you're working with don't think it's going to work, it's not going to work. So I'm really interested in hearing your take on that. So I'm just going to do that.
Will we just go for maybe 7 minutes?
7 minutes, perfect. And I will share the slides, absolutely, everybody. I'm going to sit out of the rooms, actually, so you can talk about me.